The metallic echo of Lieutenant Kara Vorn's footsteps matched the rhythmic hiss and thrum of the station's life support systems. Massive hangar bay doors loomed above, revealing glimpses of the endless black void beyond. Dropships were lined, up in a rigid formation, their hulls gleaming under the glare of industrial floodlights. Technicians scurried about, making final checks, their shouts lost amid the sound of machinery. The atmosphere was taut, vibrating with a mixture of anticipation and unspoken dread. Kara had read the report 3 times over. RX-9, it was, officially labeled. Unofficially, the brass had called it a strategic priority, which was military code for a nightmare assignment dressed up as a promotion opportunity. The planet was one of the most dangerous in charted space, a high-gravity, unstable world with an atmosphere that was 70% toxic. What little intelligence had come back suggested the terrain was a lethal maze of jagged obsidian peaks, molten rivers, and a wild ecosystem evolved to survive hell itself. Kara set her helmet down on a crate, its polished surface already scratched from years of service. She adjusted the gloves on her exosuit, a reinforced combat frame designed to keep her alive on the most hostile frontiers. Not that it would matter much if the mission went the way she feared. "Lieutenant," a gruff voice broke her concentration. She looked up to see Captain Thorne, his broad shoulders and square jaw practically built for recruitment posters. His eyes, however, betrayed the weariness of a man who had seen one too many missions like this. "Sir," she replied, straightening. "Got word from upstairs. They want the first wave on the ground within the hour. Standard recon and perimeter. Sweep before base setup." He handed her a data slate, the holographic briefing displayed in terse bullet points. "The fleet'll be in high orbit. We're on our own once we're down there." Kara scanned the orders. 1,000 soldiers, a full complement of ground, vehicles, automated turret emplacements, and enough supplies to sustain operations for 3 weeks. The brass didn't expect them to last more than a month. "They really think we can hold it?" she asked, a note of skepticism creeping into her voice. "They think we'll either hold it or soften it up enough for the next group to make a difference," Thorne said. He didn't sugarcoat things, which was one reason she respected him. The place is supposed to be rich in iridium carbon veins, and that's got the shipyard salivating. Corporates breathing down the fleet council's neck. We don't have a choice. She nodded. "Understood, I'll brief my company." He gave her a look that was almost apologetic. "Keep them tight, Vorn. Whatever's on that rock, we've got to be sharper, no screw-ups." "Won't let you down," she promised. As he walked off, she turned her attention to the nearest group of soldiers. A dozen men and women, some seasoned veterans, others fresh-faced recruits barely out of training. They were checking their gear, joking to keep the nerves at bay. She could see the tension in their movements, though. They'd heard the stories about RX-9, the whispered, accounts of the reconnaissance team that vanished without a trace. No bodies, no distress signals, just silence. Kara inhaled, let the recycled air fill her lungs, and then released it. Fear wouldn't help anyone. She strode over, her voice cutting through the din. "Listen up." The soldiers turned toward her, their chatter fading. "We've got our orders. We're deploying in less than an hour. When we hit the ground, you'll follow the established drop zones. Check your weapons, double-check your filters, and make sure your locator beacons are synced. We stick together, we follow procedure, and we do the job." One of the recruits, a wiry young man with wide eyes, raised a hand hesitantly. "Lieutenant, do we know what happened to the last team?" She met his gaze. "No, but that's why we're going in stronger. We've got a full battalion, heavy equipment, and fortified positions. We'll figure it out and we'll make it out." The young soldier nodded, though his face remained pale. As the soldiers dispersed, Kara picked up her helmet and clipped it to her belt. She could still hear the faint voices of pilots and deck crew echoing through the hangar, their words a background hum of routine activity. But her thoughts were on RX-9. It wasn't just another mission. It was a gamble, 1,000 lives placed on the table in a high-stakes game of survival. She could only hope that when the cards fell, there'd be something left to bring home. Tasks. The first thing they noticed upon descent was the atmosphere's sickly hue, a swirling blend of orange and gray. From the cockpit, the planet's surface resembled a shattered pane of glass, fractured and jagged, with thick black rivers of molten rock carving erratic paths across the land. The pilot's voice cracked through Kara's comms, a tone betraying forced calm. 30 seconds to ground, he said. Brace for a rough one. Local gravity's off by 2%, and the turbulence is energetic. Energetic. That was one word for it. The dropship bucked and swayed, its stabilizers whining under the pressure. Kyra tightened her harness, a subtle glance around the hold revealing her company seated shoulder to shoulder. Some closed their eyes, whispering private prayers. Others gripped their rifles in silent determination. Kyra herself clutched the armrests, her breath measured, willing herself to exude calm. When the ship touched down, it did so with a jarring jolt. The floor beneath them shuddered, and for a brief moment, everyone froze, as if waiting for the planet to rise up and swallow them whole. But the hull held firm. The ramp hissed open, letting in the harsh, acrid smell of RX-9's air. Filters in their helmets activated automatically, keeping the toxins at bay. Move out. Kara's voice carried over the din as the first squads began disembarking. Heavy armored personnel carriers rumbled down ramps, soldiers poured into their assigned sectors, and automated drone turrets hummed to life at the perimeter. The first moments on RX-9 were frantic but precise. Within minutes, they had their beachhead established. Kara was among the last to step out. The landscape was worse than she imagined. Razor-sharp volcanic formations stretched to the horizon, steam vents hissed intermittently from cracks in the ground, and the sky above was a constant swirl of ash. Every step felt heavy under the slightly higher gravity, and each breath through, the rebreather carried a metallic aftertaste. Lieutenant called Sergeant Oren, her second-in-command. He was a burly man with a scar running down one cheek, the kind of soldier who never showed fear, not because he didn't feel it, but because he knew how to keep it hidden. Perimeter teams are reporting clear so far. No signs of hostiles. Keep them scanning. If there's anything moving out there, I want to know before it's on top of us. She checked her wrist console, which displayed a real-time map of their surroundings. How's the terrain data coming in? Oren frowned, patchy at best. The geological scanners can't seem to penetrate the subsurface. They're calling it some kind of ultra-dense mineral strata. Could explain the resource interest, but it also means we're mostly blind below ground. Great, Kara muttered. Have the drones maintain a perimeter sweep. I don't want surprises. For the first 24 hours, everything held steady. The engineers worked tirelessly to set up a more permanent base of operations, temporary shelters, power generators, and additional defenses. Soldiers rotated in and out of patrols, marking zones where the terrain seemed stable enough for heavier equipment. The drones sent back detailed imagery of the immediate surroundings, but they revealed no life forms larger than a house cat. Still, the unease lingered. RX-9 didn't feel empty. It felt patient. On the second day, the waiting ended. The first squad to go missing had been tasked with establishing a remote sensor relay 2 kilometers from base. They checked in upon departure, confirmed their position halfway to the objective, and then nothing. Their comms went silent. When the base called them back, there was no response. Kara was in the command tent when the alert came in. She ordered an immediate search team to their last known location. The squad returned 2 hours later, carrying what was left of the original team. The bodies were mangled beyond recognition, armor ripped apart by something far stronger than human hands. One soldier, visibly shaken, reported finding claw marks, deep, uneven gouges in the surrounding rock. Kara reviewed the footage captured by their helmet cams. The video was distorted, static-filled, but the few clear frames showed something moving, something fast and low to the ground, covered in segmented plates. It had appeared suddenly, seemingly from beneath the surface, and overwhelmed them in seconds. She called an emergency meeting with the officers. Whatever's down there, it's coordinated. It's not just an animal, it's something organized. Thorne, who had arrived earlier with his own team, folded his arms. You're saying it's intelligent? I'm saying it knows we're here, and it's not happy about it. From that point on, the situation spiraled. More patrols vanished, sometimes leaving behind scorched earth and shredded equipment, other times leaving no trace at all. Seismic sensors picked up irregular tremors not from tectonic activity, but from something tunneling deep below. The pattern became clear. Wherever the ground shook, soldiers soon disappeared. RX-9 had come alive. Its environment was a predator, and they were the prey. The ground never stopped trembling. The vibrations were so subtle at first, just enough to rattle cups on tables and send a faint, uneasy ripple through the makeshift camp. But over the next several days, they grew stronger, turning the once firm rock into a place of constant shifting instability. By the third week, it felt like the whole planet was breathing underneath their boots, a slow, deliberate inhalation before another strike. Kara Vorn had never felt so exhausted. The bags under her eyes were visible even through the dust coating, her faceplate. She could tell her troops felt the same. Their 1,000-strong company had been whittled down to a little over 300. Every encounter left them weaker. The creatures came from nowhere, sometimes erupting from the ground in a spray of rock and dust, sometimes pouring out of unseen fissures in terrifying numbers. Each attack was fast, brutal, and unpredictable. They had begun calling the creatures burrowers, though the term didn't capture the sheer menace of the things. They were long, multi-limbed beings that moved with an unnatural grace, their segmented bodies covered in a chitin so dark it seemed to drink the light around them. But it wasn't just their speed or resilience that unnerved Kara. It was their behavior. The burrowers fought as if driven by a collective intelligence, striking the weakest points of their defenses, retreating before the soldiers could mount a counterattack, and returning with greater numbers and new tactics. It was as if the planet itself were fighting them, adapting faster than any commander could plan. It wasn't long before the soldiers stopped counting days and began measuring time by the intervals between attacks. The base was now little more than a series of hastily erected fortifications, layered with automated turrets and landmines. Every inch of ground was trapped or surveilled, but the burrowers still found ways in. Each breach cost lives. Each new defense only slowed the inevitable. Kara was reviewing the latest casualty report in the central command tent when the tremors began again. This time stronger, more sustained. The ground lurched and she grabbed the edge of the table to keep her balance. Sirens blared across the camp as soldiers scrambled into defensive positions. "Lieutenant!" Oren shouted, rushing in. He was bruised, one arm in a makeshift sling. "We've got another swarm inbound, north perimeter this time. More than last time, a lot more." "Numbers?" Kara asked, snatching up her rifle. "Hundreds, maybe more," Oren said grimly. "They're coming in waves and they've already taken out 2 turrets. Kara cursed under her breath. She'd known another attack was coming, but not this soon, and not this large. They had maybe half a day's worth of ammunition left and no time to replenish it. Every round counted now. "Rally everyone to fallback point 3, she ordered. "Set up overlapping fire zones and give priority to the grenade launchers. And make sure the engineers prep the seismic charges. If they start coming from underneath us, we'll blow the tunnels before they can break through." Oren nodded and ran off. Kara followed close behind, joining her troops on the front line. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of burned ammo and overheated machinery. In the distance, she saw the first wave of burrowers cresting over a ridge, their sleek forms glinting faintly in the dim red light of RX-9's sky. The sight was enough to make even seasoned veterans flinch. "Hold steady!" she shouted. Her voice carried across the line, bringing a moment of stillness to the chaotic scene. "Wait for my mark. Conserve your fire." The burrowers closed in, their clawed legs tearing through the terrain with terrifying speed. Kara let them get closer, closer, until she could see the individual segments of their armor and the faint glow of what looked like internal bioluminescence. "Fire!" she yelled. The soldiers unleashed a torrent of bullets, grenades, and plasma bolts. The sound was deafening, a constant barrage that made the ground feel as if it were shattering beneath their feet. The front ranks of burrowers fell in heaps, But for everyone they killed, 3 more surged forward. The line wavered as the creatures slammed into the defenses, claws ripping into barricades and armor alike. "Engineers, now!" Kyra barked into her comm. Seconds later, a series of controlled explosions rocked the battlefield. The seismic charges detonated in the tunnels below, collapsing passageways and sending bursts of dust and debris into the air. Several burrowers vanished into the sudden sinkholes, but it wasn't enough to stop the main swarm. Kyra gritted her teeth and held her ground, fighting alongside her troops. She felt the weight of every life lost, the steady attrition that wore them down day by day. The burrowers were relentless, and RX-9 seemed determined to break them. By the time the attack finally subsided, the northern perimeter was in ruins. Kyra looked around at the survivors, fewer than she had hoped. Orin limped over, his face pale and drawn. "We can't keep this up," he said simply. "If they hit us like that again, we won't have enough to hold them." Kyra didn't answer right away. She scanned the horizon, the blackened terrain stretching endlessly, and the faint tremors that hinted the planet wasn't done with them yet. "We don't have a choice," she said at last. "We hold as long as we can. If we can't hold—" She trailed off, unwilling to say the rest. If they couldn't hold, there would be no rescue, no reinforcements, no one left to tell their story. RX-9 had already taken so much. It wouldn't stop until it took everything. The sky over RX-9 darkened further, the swirling haze thickening until it felt as though night had descended prematurely. Kyra stood on the highest remaining section of the perimeter wall, staring out at the jagged horizon. Her armor was battered, the once polished black plates scratched and dented from days of relentless combat. Around her, the camp was a shadow of what it had been, a labyrinth of crumbling barricades, half-buried equipment, and soldiers moving with the hollow-eyed exhaustion of people who knew the end was near. In the distance, the tremors were growing stronger again. They could all feel it, a deep rhythmic vibration that made the ground tremble like the heartbeat of some malevolent god. RX-9 wasn't just a battleground anymore. It was a predator, alive and deliberate, and it wanted them gone. Orin approached, limping heavily. His face was pale, his breath shallow, and his bandaged arm hung awkwardly at his side. "Lieutenant," he said, voice low, "it's worse than we thought. The seismic sensors are picking up multiple tunnels converging on our position. It's not just one swarm, it's all of them." Kyra closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. "What's the status of the evacuation?" "The fleet's sending down one last dropship. ETA is 45 minutes, Orin replied. He hesitated. "But Lieutenant, we don't have enough men to hold that long. Not against what's coming." Her jaw tightened. He was right, of course, they'd lost too many people. Every previous assault had chipped away at their numbers, at their resolve. The base was a skeleton of its former self, held together by sheer grit and desperation. 45 minutes might as well have been 45 hours. "Then we make them pay for every inch," Kyra said, a cold edge to her voice. She turned to the remaining troops gathered near the command tent. "Listen up," she shouted. "We've got one shot at this. A dropship is inbound, but if we don't hold the line, none of us are getting off this rock. I need every one of you to dig in. Use the heaviest firepower we've got. Set the traps, plant the charges, anything that slows them down. We only need 45 minutes. That's it. Hold the line." Her voice carried over the camp, and though her troops were weary, bloodied, and outnumbered, they responded with a chorus of affirmations. It wasn't the enthusiasm of a hopeful army. It was the grim determination of those who had nothing left to lose. Kyra descended from the wall, barking orders. The soldiers moved quickly, placing their last landmines, positioning the few working turrets and stacking every remaining crate of munitions near the front line. Engineers rerouted power from non-essential systems to the defensive grid. Every ounce of their effort was poured into this one final stand. Then the tremors stopped. The silence was worse. No one spoke. Every soldier was locked in place, gripping, their weapons tightly, eyes scanning the horizon. The first burrowers appeared just as the sky began to lighten. They came in waves, hundreds of them at first, then thousands. Kara's comm buzzed with panicked voices as the creatures hit the outer defenses, clawing through the barricades, dodging streams of gunfire and overrunning the turrets. The ground itself seemed to shift and pulse under the swarm, as if the planet were helping them move faster, strike harder. Kara stood at the forefront, rifle braced against her shoulder, firing in controlled bursts. Around her, soldiers were yelling, firing, falling back, and fighting again. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt ammunition and the high-pitched shrieks of the burrowers. It was chaos, but it was organized chaos. For every 10 soldiers who fell, another 10 would step into place, holding the line for just a few more seconds. The dropship's approach was a distant hum at first, then a growing roar. Kara's comm crackled as the pilot's voice came through. "LZ's too hot. I can't land under this fire. Just get low enough for a ramp drop," Kara shouted back. "We'll make it work." The dropship hovered above the main defensive line, its ramp extending just enough for soldiers to start boarding. Kara ordered the retreat, covering her troops as they fell back toward the ship. The burrowers pressed in closer, their numbers overwhelming. Kara emptied magazine after magazine, tossing grenades and blasting any creature that got too close. The last group of soldiers reached the ramp, Orin among them. He turned, waving for Kara to follow. "Lieutenant, come on. We're the last ones." Kara glanced back at the battlefield. The line was gone, the defenses shattered. The burrowers surged forward, an unstoppable tide of claws and teeth. She didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the ramp, firing over her shoulder, her heart pounding. As she leapt onto the ramp, the dropship began to rise, its engines screaming, but the swarm didn't stop. The creatures leapt after them, clinging to the dropship's hull, tearing at its underbelly. Soldiers shot at them, trying to dislodge the attackers before they breached the interior. The ship lurched and shuddered as the pilot fought to gain altitude. "Hold on," the pilot yelled. "This is gonna be rough." The ship tilted sharply, and Kara held onto a cargo strap, her muscles screaming with the effort. The creatures were relentless. Several soldiers fell, pulled from the ramp, by burrowers who swarmed up the sides. Kara fired again and again until her rifle clicked empty. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the dropship broke through the thick atmosphere and into the clear void of space. The few remaining burrowers fell away, their bodies consumed by the planet's gravity. Kara collapsed onto the floor of the ship, gasping for breath. Around her, the surviving soldiers were silent, their faces etched with exhaustion and grief. They had held the line, barely, but at what cost? As the dropship docked with the fleet, Kara's comm crackled again. "Lieutenant Vorn, you made it. The brass wants your debrief immediately." She leaned back against the bulkhead, closing her eyes. "Understood," she said quietly. There would be questions, demands for reports, analysis of what went wrong. But Kara knew that no report would capture what had happened on RX-9. The planet wasn't just a death world. It was something worse, something alive. They had fought it and they had escaped, but they hadn't beaten it. No one could beat RX-9. The debrief was held in a cold, windowless room aboard the fleet's command carrier. The air was too clean, the lighting too sterile, such a contrast to the choking haze and flickering firelight of RX-9 that Kara couldn't sit still. Her leg bounced under the table as she faced the ranking officers, a row of immaculately uniformed figures whose expressions were carved from stone. She laid out the facts as best she could: the initial landing, the increasingly intelligent attacks, the horrifying losses. Her words felt hollow, though. How could she explain what it was like to stand on ground that seemed alive? To face enemies that weren't just animals, but part of something larger, something that learned faster than they could adapt? As she spoke, the officers interrupted frequently, asking for exact troop numbers, specific time frames, a detailed count of remaining munitions. Kara answered, but each response felt more mechanical. She couldn't stop replaying those final moments in her head, the faces of her soldiers, the ones who didn't make it to the dropship. She'd lost Orin, too. He'd been pulled from the ramp in that last desperate scramble, his screams echoing in her helmet until they were cut off by static. "And you're certain," the lead officer finally said, his voice clipped, "that There's no chance of establishing a stable foothold on RX-9? Kara's throat tightened. No, sir. Any operation there would be suicide. The planet's more than just hostile. It's actively working against us. A silence fell over the room. The officers exchanged glances. The lead officer leaned back, folding his hands. The council will be disappointed. They were counting on that iridium carbon supply to fuel the next wave of ship production. Still, it's clear we need to reevaluate our approach. Reevaluate? Kara's voice rose before she could stop herself. Sir, it's not about approach. RX-9 is a death world, period. It won't let us take it. One of the other officers, a stern-faced woman with silver-threaded hair, raised an eyebrow. You're suggesting the planet is sentient. I don't know what it is, Kara said, her frustration bubbling to the surface. All I know is that it learns, it adapts, and it destroys everything we send there. The lead officer cleared his throat. Thank you, Lieutenant Vorn. That will be all. She knew she had overstepped, but she didn't care. She stood, saluted stiffly, and left the room. Back in the ship's living quarters, Kara sat alone in her bunk. She stared at the steel floor, her mind a haze of faces, orders, and the ever-present memory of RX-9's shifting landscape. She'd survived, but at what cost? The people she'd trained with, the ones who had trusted her, were all gone. She was the last one left to carry their story. The fleet had no intention of releasing the full details of the mission to the public. What little would be revealed would be sanitized, reduced to a few lines in an operations report. The soldiers' names would be recorded, and their deaths would be marked as necessary losses for strategic evaluation. No one would know what really happened. No one would understand. Kara knew she couldn't stay in the military. The thought of another deployment, another campaign where lives would be thrown away for nebulous strategic priorities, was unbearable. She submitted her resignation the next day. It wasn't an act of protest. She simply couldn't do it anymore. She left the fleet behind and disappeared from the public eye. For a time she wandered, drifting from station to station, planet to planet, trying to outrun the memories. But they followed her everywhere. RX-9 haunted her dreams, and sometimes, in the quiet moments between stations, she could still feel the ground shifting beneath her boots. Eventually, she found a small colony on a backwater world, one of the few places where no one recognized her, where no one asked about the fleet or RX-9. She settled there, taking work as a mechanic in a dusty, sunlit outpost, the sound of tools and the steady rhythm of labor her only companions. But even then, she couldn't escape the weight of what she'd seen. The people in the colony came to know her as the quiet, efficient mechanic who never spoke about her past. Yet when something reminded her of the burrowers, the sound of drilling in the mines, a seismic tremor from a far-off quake, she would freeze, gripping her tools until her knuckles turned white. They called her a survivor, but Kara knew the truth. She hadn't survived RX-9. She'd merely escaped it. Years passed. Kara kept her distance from the military and from any mention of RX-9, retreating deeper into her isolated life in the colony. The world she had chosen was a sleepy one. Desert plains stretching to the horizon, a single blue sun baking the ground. The colony itself was little more than a handful of scattered prefab buildings, a mining site, and a small community hub where off-duty miners gathered to play cards and share drinks. Kara seldom joined them. She preferred the quiet of her workshop and the steady, predictable rhythm of fixing engines and calibrating drilling equipment. But even here, among the dusty streets and simple routines, her mind could never fully leave RX-9. Some nights she would find herself standing outside her workshop, staring up at the unfamiliar constellations and wondering what had become of that hostile world. Was it still out there waiting, unyielding, untouched since they had fled? Or had someone else been foolish enough to return, thinking they could succeed where her company had failed? The past came back to her in fragments, flashes of faces, the flicker of muzzle flashes in the choking ash, the bone-deep vibrations of the burrowers tearing through the ground. Sometimes she would wake drenched in sweat, her hand groping for a weapon that wasn't there, her mind screaming commands to soldiers who were long gone. One particularly hot afternoon, as she worked on an overheated mining crawler, she heard a voice that stopped her cold. "Vorn? Lieutenant Kara Vorn?" She turned slowly, her breath catching. Standing in the doorway of the workshop was a man she recognized instantly, Fleet Commander Jaron Thorne. The once unflappable officer now looked older, his broad shoulders stooped slightly, his face lined with more years of stress and loss. He wasn't in uniform, but she would have known him anywhere. "Commander," she said, setting down her wrench. Her voice was flat, wary. "What are you doing here?" He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the workshop as if inspecting the tools, and parts might give him courage. "You're a hard person to find." That was the idea. "Kara," Thorne said quietly, "we need to talk." She crossed her arms. "About what? You know I'm out. I don't work for the fleet anymore." "It's not about the fleet," he said. "It's about RX-9. The name hit her like a punch to the stomach. "I have nothing to say about RX-9, she replied, turning back to the crawler. "Whatever the fleet is doing, it's not my problem anymore." "It's not the fleet," Thorne insisted. "It's something else, something worse." Kara froze, her hand hovering over a bolt. She didn't look at him, but her voice softened just enough to betray the flicker of fear she'd kept buried. "What do you mean?" Thorne stepped closer, his tone lowering. "A month ago, a long-range probe went dark. It was supposed to skim the edge of RX-9's system and relay updated cartographic data, nothing more. No one set foot on the planet, no one was deployed, it was automated. But the last transmission wasn't data. It was something else. A signal. A repeating pattern that wasn't there before." Kara turned slowly, her heart pounding. "What kind of pattern?" Thorne hesitated, then pulled a small device from his pocket. "I don't know what it means, no one does. But it wasn't static." He activated the device, and the sound that emerged sent a chill down Kara's spine. It was faint at first, a series of low rhythmic pulses, then it grew. Layers of noise building upon one another. Something almost musical, almost organic. There was an eerie, deliberate quality to it, like a code or a language, but one that felt wholly alien. It started the moment the probe reached RX-9's orbit, Thorne said. It repeated for 36 hours, then stopped. The probe was destroyed before it could send anything else. "We're not sure what happened. Maybe the burrowers reached it somehow, or maybe it self-terminated." Kara shook her head, stepping away from the device as if it were radioactive. "I told you before, RX-9 isn't just a planet, it's alive, or something close to it. We saw it in how the burrowers fought. They weren't just acting on instinct. They had purpose, intelligence, and now it's sending signals," Thorne said, "which means it's something more than what we thought. The Council doesn't want to touch it. They've declared it off limits, but you know how these things go. Someone, somewhere, is going to try again. And the next time we won't just lose soldiers. If this thing can reach beyond its orbit, don't." Kara cut him off. Her voice was sharp, angry. "Don't come here to scare me with what might happen. I did my part. I survived and I walked away. I'm not going back. Not for you, not for the fleet, not for anyone." Thorne nodded slowly, pocketing the device. "I'm not asking you to go back. I just thought you'd want to know." "I don't," Kara said firmly, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "I can't." He stood there for a moment, looking at her as if he might say something more. But then he simply nodded again, turned, and walked out into the blinding sun. Kara stood alone in the workshop, the faint echoes of that strange signal still ringing in her ears. For the first time in years, she felt the ground beneath her feet tremble, not from tectonic activity, not from the work of machines, but from the weight of what she had left behind. RX-9 was still out there, still alive. And though she had escaped it once, she couldn't escape the feeling that one day, it would call her back.